Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Pharmacy for the People, where I try to put your health back into your hands by breaking down complex medical issues into bite-sized morsels, or at least biter-sized morsels. My name is James. I'm your host. I'm a licensed practicing pharmacist. And as a reminder, if what we talk about today, if you find that helpful, consider subscribing to the channel and sending this video to somebody who you think would also find this helpful. Okay, let's get going. Have you ever been engaged in a debate with somebody, sharing facts and perspectives back and forth, when BAM! They hit you with, look it up, or do your research? There are few phrases that make my skin crawl more than ending a worthwhile debate with the universal trump card of do your research. It's the adult equivalent of nuh-uh times infinity. I mean, what do they even mean by research? Are they just sitting on the toilet scrolling on Facebook, eating the information that the algorithm specifically designed to feed you information that you want to see? Are you, reading medical journals and deciding based on the information therein what's good and what's right? Or are you literally sitting in a laboratory as the primary investigator saying, do your research? I don't know. But like most rage-inducing phrases, there is some legitimacy to it. In our current age of rampant social media, it has given a platform of speech to basically everybody, old and young, rich and poor, educated, uneducated, experienced and inexperienced. On one hand, this gives us access to an incredible wealth of resources. Dermatologists who spend their time debunking myths and meaningless marketing ploys, household gardeners with years of experience in keeping all those plants that we kill alive, product reviews that give you a taste of something before you actually buy it, people from different cultures giving us perspectives that we would never get otherwise without having a lot of money, a lot of time, and a full passport, pharmacists helping people understand the what and the why behind medical decisions. On the other hand, we also have charlatans with a knack for persuasive rhetoric, passionate and angry people whose opinions are stronger than their understanding, swaths of the dogmatic, regurgitating group thinking without thinking about what they're talking about, hate speech aimed at dehumanizing and disenfranchising, and then people who are just wrong, just mistaken. People who mean no harm whatsoever, but end up starting a rumor that turns into a myth that becomes a legend that is more well known than the truth actually is. So having informed positions on topics seems like a worthwhile, legitimate goal, so do your research. But how do you even start to find a way through the untamed jungle of information? How do you ensure the voices that you trust are not leading you into confusion, error, or poverty? I think that's actually a very good question. You might say limit the field. Not everyone with a platform will treat the platform with respect. So why not just keep out the bad eggs? Some would argue that in America we have the right to the freedom of speech. We're guaranteed that constitutional right. I would argue back that, as a good friend of mine put it, the freedom to speech does not mean the freedom to platform. Nevertheless, if we actually suggested trying to limit the field and limit access to a platform, we'd have a fiasco on our hands, and we'd also lose out on all that incredibly valuable information and perspective from other people. So instead of getting rid of the mess, what if we have a way that will help us navigate through the mess to find the good stuff? Welcome to Pharmacy for the People's 4-part series on how to do your research. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I know the title is in jest, but seriously, I think this is going to be a whole lot of fun. It's going to be largely geared towards medical evidence and medical intervention, since that's the world I spend most of my time in, but I think this will be useful no matter what the topic is. Today we're going to learn how to follow the white rabbit by checking sources of information. The next video we're going to take a quick trip into evidence-based medicine and understand the strength of different types of medical evidence. Then how not to argue with a logical fallacy, and then we'll wrap it up in part 4, talking about cognitive biases and the way that our brains lie to us. I'm legitimately excited about these. So first off, let's follow that white rabbit. When I say follow the white rabbit, I am, of course, making an allusion to Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. When Alice saw a white rabbit running by, she follows it, and she goes into the rabbit's hole to find out where it was, and the rabbit's hole goes really, really, really deep. When we're doing our research, one of the most basic necessities to ensure that we're not just regurgitating worthless drivel is knowing where the information comes from.
Yes, of course, that makes sense. I would never build a conclusion on bad information. I only eat the finest, purest information harvested from the natural organic truth farms in the mountains of wherever.
All right, so we're all guilty of this, so let's just swallow that really quick. We hear a fact, we read a title, where someone screams a tweet at us, some information collides with us from somewhere, and we absorb it, like airlines keep absorbing knee space, without checking the origin of the information. So whether we intend to or not, we end up inadvertently peddling ideas and facts to the people around us that are as substantial as a wet paper plate, if we're not doing our due diligence, following that white rabbit and finding out where those ideals and those facts came from. What am I talking about? So most people out there are not subscribed to multiple medical journals looking through newest medical research to stay up to date. Now, most of us get our current information from social media, news outlets, newspapers, magazines, random clickbait on the internet. It's anything that you come in contact with on a regular basis. Regardless of the source that we typically use, information comes in primary, secondary, or tertiary sources. Primary sources are the original information sources. In the medical context, that is biotechnical information. Those are research papers that are being developed, written, and then published into peer-reviewed journals. In the news community, primary sources are the people taking testimonies and pictures there on the scene. In the social media realm, I guess you could call the primary source would be you in social media. Something that directly happens to you. You are telling everybody that you accidentally flushed your keys down the toilet because you saw a spider in your house. Secondary sources summarize and interpret the primary sources. So textbooks and reviews in medical literature, commentators and opinions in news media, and people's reactions to things on social media would be considered secondary sources. They interpret and summarize primary literature. And then tertiary literature gathers information from secondary and primary together into one spot. So like encyclopedias or medical guidelines, etc. They gather all this information from secondary sources, primary sources, and put it right there. What that means for us is that unless you are in the habit of reading medical journals, most of us live in the secondary source strata, the interpretations and summaries of primary sources. Knowing what information is being summarized and interpreted, and knowing the quality of that information is really, really important, because otherwise you're building your house on a sandy beach or whatever. For example, you wake up in the morning, you check your phone, and you have a notification from your favorite news outlet, Deja Vu News, saying, new vaccines, more harm than good. So you click on it, and you read the article that says that according to an article written by the Associated Press, the newest COVID vaccine from Medicor has shown potentially fatal adverse events in its trials. Experts say that they would prefer to see a complete trial before they weigh in with their opinions. So you can take this in many different ways. If you just read the title, you've already accepted an opinion as a fact. So this is a secondary source, right? So the primary source was the Associated Press that was then summarized and interpreted through Deja Vu News. If you just read the article, you're just getting the secondary source's opinions on the original article. If you just read the original article, if you go back and find the original article, then you might find out a lot more context to the text. Context like the adverse events occurred at the exact same rate in the people with the intervention, with the vaccine as with the placebo. Important context like this was preliminary information that doesn't represent all of the data. But no matter how you take it, if you don't follow the rabbit down its hole and find out where that original source in that context came from, it turns into a telephone game. Especially if there's bias involved that may warp the interpretations of the original data. Telephone game, like, they said, that she said, that we said, that her mom married Pocahontas. It gets out of hand really fast. Example number 2. You're sitting on the bus on your way to work, scrolling on social media, and you come across a post by one of your favorite musicians that says something to the effect of, the city of Chicago is specifically targeting musicians because it hates the power of music to overcome hate. Of course, this is an interpretation of an action taken by the city of Chicago, so you do a quick search on your favorite search engine for the city of Chicago musicians. And you find an article written that morning from Reuters News about the city of Chicago canceling an upcoming music festival because many of the musicians in the lineup were holding rallies encouraging violence and property destruction during the upcoming festival. And obviously they didn't want that to happen. So you can see the bias in the social media post because one of the people hosting the rallies, if this musician was one of the people hosting the rallies, he might interpret the actions differently than most people who would, because he wants things to go his way. Other people from the outside without that particular bias would say, oh, they're just trying to avoid civil unrest and destruction of property. But his bias causes him to interpret things differently. Of course, strictly speaking, this is an unofficial source of information that doesn't summarize anything. It's not technically a secondary source of information. It is kind of a secondhand source of nothing. Basically, it's conjecture because there's no sources for it. You don't know where this person got their information. You just Googled and you're assuming that those two things were the same. Nevertheless, we love to absorb the opinions of those we venerate and express it as our own. So the example bears thought, which is just like my third example where say you get to work, you walk in and someone's like,
man, I watched this whole video from a doctor who said COVID didn't exist and it was really a scam to control people. I watched the whole thing. You should watch it. It'll really open your eyes.
So I send you the link, you click on it, and you see Meryl Streep, MD, start word vomiting claims and accusations without offering a single citation, source, or scrap of evidence to support her claims. So out of curiosity, you look it up, you find out that she quit being an active gynecologist 4 years ago, and now she makes a living just by peddling conspiracy theories in books and in conferences. So this one gets into a really important topic, applicability of an expert witness to a particular situation. This lady is not a virologist, she is not an immunologist, nor an infectious disease physician. She's not actively working in her field, which doesn't apply to the situation anyway, and she has a huge conflict of interest based on her profiting on people believing what she says. So, does her testimony apply to this at all? Is she presenting evidence for verification, or just saying whatever comes to her mind? Is this a left field, crazy pants opinion fest that we believe because she has an MD after her name? Or is it more substantial than that? So to think about that, suppose for a minute that this is a court case. Say that we've been selected as members of the jury or as the judge itself. That instead of casually absorbing information as it comes at us from whoever's speaking, we're tasked with the responsibility to differentiate between testimony or evidence that's substantiated or testimony that's not substantiated. What information pertains to the case, what is fluff, what is admissible as evidence, and what is caca. Granted, this is not a court case. But like in a court of law, we are the triers of fact, just like the judge or jury. We are the triers of fact in what we approve as truth. What we absorb, what we choose to believe. The information that we approve as fact in our lives becomes the lens through which we interpret the world and the foundation on which we build our habits and our interactions with other people. It becomes our lifestyle. Right? Like our beliefs become our thoughts become our actions, and our actions become our habits. So the things that you approve as truth, the things that you believe, will eventually filter down and become part of your lifestyle, whether you intend for them to be or not. I think that's worth making sure that the information is good. So for the sake of the argument, let's say that this is a court case. How does the court differentiate between admissible expert witness and nonsense? Because you could literally have anyone get up on the stand and say whatever you wanted them to say. You could pay people to say certain things. You could pull somebody in off the street, have them stand up there on the stand, and they could just say whatever they wanted to. Just like anyone now can go onto social media and say whatever they want to. Anybody has a platform. So we have to differentiate. We need to have a criteria to differentiate between somebody whose testimony matters on a particular topic and someone who doesn't. Using the court case as our example, Federal Rule of Evidence 702 actually gives us a way to differentiate. And it states that a witness who is qualified as an expert by knowledge, skill, experience, training, or education may testify in the form of an opinion or otherwise if A, the expert's scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge will help the trier of fact to understand the evidence or to determine a fact in issue. B, the testimony is based on sufficient facts or data. C, the testimony is the product of reliable principles and methods. And D, the expert has reliably applied the principles and methods to the facts of the case. In effect, what this says is you can't just say whatever you want and expect us to believe you. You have to prove what you're saying is right, and then prove that it applies. You still have to show your work. The testimony has to be supported by data produced by reliable methods, which, right off the top, rules out social media as a reliable primary source of information on any technical issues, maybe as a secondary source that can be tracked back to the primary, but when do we ever do that? The evidence rule doesn't actually stop there. In 1993, there was another court case that further specified requirements for a scientific expert testimony, what became referred to as the Daubert standard, which states that an expert's testimony will be admitted if its methodology meets the further requirements. Number one, the theory or technique in question can be and has been tested. Number two, it has been subjected to peer review and publication. 3, its known or potential error rate can be taken into account. 4, the existence and maintenance of standards controlling its operation for the technique. And then number 5, it has attracted widespread acceptance within a relevant scientific community. In practical terms, for us looking for information, this is mostly applied to a technique, a scientific technique used to arrive at a conclusion. But what that means for us is that in practical terms, we've just further limited the ability for someone, anyone with scientific credentials to say something convincing and be trusted without first establishing the validity of the method that they arrived at those conclusions. And let me draw your attention specifically to number 5, the acceptance within a relevant scientific community. The American Institute of Physics is likely not a relevant scientific community in relationship to evaluating an appropriate surgical method. I can think of some exceptions to that, but you see where I'm going with this anyway. So if we apply this to the example I was using before of an MD with an inapplicable specialization making claims and giving opinion without providing evidence for the claims at all, if I was a judge in this case of is what she's saying good evidence, I'd throw it out entirely. Now, to clarify, obviously we don't live in a bubble of the jurisprudence system. We all have the right to our opinions and the right to hear and interpret information and to draw a conclusion on that information. But I think what is vitally important for us to do is to pay very close attention to how much weight we give to that testimony. It can be very tempting to align ourselves according to a bias depending on who we prefer to win for whatever reasons. We'll talk about that in the last 2 videos of this series. But how sure of our conclusions are we? How confident are we in our faculties to interpret technical information that we're not educated to interpret? You remember that Dunning-Kruger effect? How much of our confidence in our conclusions is just arrogance or self-protection? Imagine standing in a room full of 20 forensic pathologists who say that someone died from a gunshot wound, and there's also one horticulturist in there who says that it was from falling on a stick, not from a gunshot wound. The pathologists provide evidence from previous cases showing how the wound matches other gunshot wounds, and they also use evidence from around the room to show that a gun was recently fired. The horticulturist testifies that he himself has fallen on a stick and the wound indeed looked like that wound. Who would you be more likely to believe? What if you were holding a recently fired gun? Then who would you be more likely to side with? Maintaining objectivity when we have a vested interest in a topic is very difficult. That's called a conflict of interest. We've talked about it before. It comes up again, a conflict of interest. It exposes a strong potential of bias that will sway your conclusions one way or another. That's what a bias is. Okay guys, really quickly, let's apply what we've just been talking about and take a look at 3 different websites that have good, better, and even better citations and sources for their information. Let's apply what we're learning here. Full disclosure, I had to re-record this portion because the first time I did it, it was so embarrassingly long that, well, let's do it again anyway. So let's take a look really quick. So what I did was I just did a search for best essential oils for disinfecting. This is not me giving you my opinion or my endorsement of essential oils. I just thought it would be a fun topic to look at. So using that one search, I picked 3 different websites, and we'll look at each one, looking specifically at the author and their expertise, the citations that they use, any kind of conflicts of interest, and I'll give you my verdict on each one. So let's move really quickly. So this first one here is from a place called Cashmere Blog, and it's 5 best essential oils for cleaning and disinfecting. Who is the author? It says that the author is Cashmere Collections. So that's obviously not a person. But if we scroll all the way down here to the bottom and we take a look at for more information, we've got an About Cashmere here. We can click on that, and that tells us that this website is specifically designed to reflect the personality and influences of a star, some sort of high influence person. What they talk about is dedicating teams of savvy people to coming up with ideas that you can trust and buy from, but they don't actually say who they are, what their credentials are, or anything. You're just supposed to trust them. So in terms of our authors, we've got nothing. In terms of citations, if we scroll down here a little bit, we look at lemon oil, pink grapefruit oil, tea tree oil. As you scroll down through here, there are no links. There are no sources whatsoever. All they have here is clickbait that will actually take you over to some other person's website that tells you how to make something. It doesn't actually support the claims that they're making, right? And then in terms of conflict of interest, so this website is specifically designed to have you buy things. You can tell that because down at the bottom, they don't talk about who they are. They talk about the ways that you can buy stuff from them. So in conclusion, or my verdict for this website is no author information, no supporting sources, and heavy conflicts of interest. This would be a website that I would not trust for your time or your money. Okay, let's move on to the next one then. This one is a little bit better. The best essential oils for cleaning and disinfecting. Number 1, our author. So the author right here, she puts it right at the top, right? She says her name is Tracy Ariza, DDS. That's a doctor of dental surgery. Right off the bat, you might be asking, why is a dentist talking about essential oils? And I think that's a very reasonable question. Does her expertise apply to this? No, not unless she has some other expertise that extends beyond that. But she has information right here on her website that talks about it. She likes making natural things. She is no longer a dentist, and she has moved out of the country, and this is what she does now. In terms of citations, she actually puts some citations in here. Let me scroll down to one that I looked at earlier that I thought was a pretty good one. And tea tree oil, she talks about... she actually has links to biomedical literature that you can look at and evaluate for yourself, which is really nice. However, some of the claims that she makes are not cited. So she makes some claims that do have citations that you can confirm, some claims that go beyond the citation. So she's got a couple citations in here that talk about some portions of information, like specifically here in the tea tree oil section, she talks about it being antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, anti-inflammatory, but the citation that she actually gives you is not there to back that stuff up. So it doesn't mean necessarily that her claims are false, but she doesn't give you the choice to follow up and find out for yourself. So she's headed in the right direction by giving you some supporting evidence, but there's not enough, and she goes beyond the scope of that evidence in making her claims. And then in terms of conflict of interest, up here at the top, she actually tells you that she may receive a commission if you purchase through links on this post. So she talks about it. She exposes her conflicts of interest. So a conflict of interest does potentiate the opportunity for bias which would ruin some of our objectivity in trying to understand a truth, a fact, a claim. But she provides you evidence and understanding so that you can take that into account when you're deciding whether or not you want to trust her information. So my verdict for this website is that she's moving in the right direction. She has some expertise, but it's not directly to the subject at hand. She has some citations, but they don't totally cover the information that she provides. And she does have conflicts of interest, but she discloses those. So, I'll give it like a C. All right, let's look at the very last one. This is from a place called healthline.com. Again, how to kill bacteria with essential oils. In terms of our author, right up here at the top, we have a thing saying that this article is medically reviewed by Deborah Rose Wilson with a PhD, a master's in nursing. She was an RN. And then she's got some other things behind her name. I don't know what those are, but if I click on the link, it actually tells me more about it. And it goes into some of her holistic background, and that she has a master's of science in holistic nursing in particular. So she has expertise that does apply directly to this field. However, this was written by someone named Valencia Higuera, and she is just a freelance writer in Chesapeake, Virginia. So in terms of the author, we have information and we get to decide for ourselves whether or not we trust their expertise. It may or may not directly apply here, but we have that information that we can take into account. Nevertheless, let's look at citations. Do they cite their information very well? So I looked at this ahead of time. You scroll down here to the tea tree oil. So they have a link here for research about tea tree oil. They've got all this listed information about what these things can do, the bacteria that it can actually affect. And then this paper, I went through a good portion of it, and it does have some supporting evidence for the claims that are made about it having antibacterial activity against these. Now, this information does not go as far as to say, does it have activity on your body? Does it have activity on a countertop? Does it have activity if it's applied in an oil or a lotion or a topical solution or something you take orally or literally any other form? It only talks about it being in a laboratory setting having some activity, which is good news. But if you're going to apply that as she does right here, how to use a tea tree oil, if you're going to apply that information to a specific application, you have to have evidence that backs up that specific application, which she does not have, unfortunately. In terms of conflict of interest for this particular website, there are not actually any links that you can follow in the article itself to buy something. And you can't buy anything from Healthline. Then if you go into their About Us section, they actually talk about trying to provide information for people for them to look at and to better themselves at their own leisure. They are just providing the information. They don't want you to buy anything from them. They get their funding from somewhere else. So in terms of conflict of interest, there really isn't one. So my verdict for this one is that they've got good author information, some very good citations, and no conflicts of interest. And even with those poor citations, it's really just about the application. They give you the supporting evidence, things that you can go and find out about. So overall, I would give this a solid A-, just because they have not cited everything. So I hope that makes a difference between something that is clearly just out there to get your money, something that is doing its best and may also receive money, and then something that is out there specifically just to educate you without any hope of getting money from you directly, the consumer.
Do your research.
In conclusion, how do you avoid being taken advantage of by misleading bias, manipulative charlatans, and common error? Well, one of those ways is to follow the white rabbit down its rabbit hole and find out the source of the information being provided. Where information comes from is as important as the information itself. What good to you is bad information? You be the trier of fact in the trial of your mind's court and decide if the evidence provided is strong enough for you to build upon it. Don't be taken advantage of slick writing, fancy graphics, and attractive presentation. That's called the halo effect, and it's bad. Judge the information for the information, one claim at a time. Bias is the enemy of objectivity, and it transforms an otherwise good source of information into a backstreet black market for truth. All of this is about eliminating bias as best as we can. And this is Pharmacy for the People, after all, so you might be asking yourself, how does the strength of evidence from medical literature stand up against the same kind of criteria? Well, you're probably not asking yourself, but that is what is up next. We are going to take a look at medical literature in the next episode and to find out what is evidence-based medicine and how it can help you to do your research. If you guys have websites and sources that you want me to evaluate, let me know in the comments, and I'll give you guys my thoughts. Thank you again so much for watching. Remember to ask your questions and to leave your comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by liking or subscribing. Thank you guys again, and here's to your health. Hello everybody.